Well, we're going to start wiring up the driver tubes of our 6SQ7 amp. And the first thing we want to do is build the resistor capacitor decoupling network that goes between the B plus and the driver tubes. And we install this to make sure that any signal that might be on the B plus, since they are hooked directly to the output transformers, is filtered out. And this also provides another resistor capacitor filtering for the B plus to make sure that we have really clean DC going to these high gain input tubes. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a couple of capacitors to the 5-terminal strip here, and we're going to be installing them in these lower holes like this. That way the capacitors sit nice and flush, and you just bend the leads up until they sit like that. Where the capacitors are flat against the surface with the mounting tab. So I'm going to come in here with some solder and I'm going to get the solder melting to the tab first. And then onto the capacitor leads. And before we pull that off, we'll straighten that and let that cool off. Then once that's cooled off, you can tweak it a little bit like that. And I didn't mention before I started soldering these, I put a little bit of contact cement between these two capacitors and glued them together so that they aren't all flopping around while we're trying to solder this. So then we come in, and it might help to put something behind them just so you got a little something to push against while you're soldering. We come in and do that terminal. Like that. And let me zoom in on this last one so you can see exactly how I'm doing this. You put the iron up against the tab first and get the solder melting onto the tab. And then once you see it melting onto the tab, then you put the solder into the lead and pull the heat away. And there we go. Now we come in and trim these leads off nice and tight. And we're ready to bolt this guy to the inside of our amplifier. So these are going to bolt down right here underneath this screw. So we want to remove this screw. We don't need the washer. Just the lock washer is all we need on this. We want to get as much engagement into that tube ring as we can since it's out of a softer aluminum material. And then we want to come in with some of this 3M sticky tape. I know somebody was making a big deal about that this isn't the black tape. Yes, the black tape is a little heavy dutier, but we're talking about supporting an ounce of a capacitor that's already attached on one end. And I'm hoping that we're not going to have 140 degree heat underneath this chassis. And so I believe this material is perfectly capable. But if you haven't bought any of this material yet, and they have the black heavy dutier type available, it's not going to hurt to buy that. But this is what I got on hand, and I was not going to make a special trip to the store to buy another kind when this will work perfectly fine for what we're wanting to do. So we're going to stick those down just like that. And as you can see, I probably have to tear the coating off this capacitor to even get those to come up now. So make sure you have them lined up before you stick them down. And we get that screw nice and snug. And here's our two capacitors. So the next thing we need to do is we've got a couple of 3.6K resistors that are going to go between here and here. And then we're going to have a couple of power wires that come from this terminal over to here on both sides. And then we're going to have the power wires that go to the B plus are going to come across here and over to the 5 terminal strips that we're going to have for the driver tubes. There's going to be one here and one over here. Now a lot of amplifiers just have one RC network, like one resistor and one capacitor, that feed both of the driver tubes. And while that works, I like having separate, like split rail power going to the input tubes to isolate them from each other. But it's up to you. If you want to save the cost of one resistor and one capacitor, you could probably use one B plus decoupled power for both driver tubes. The other thing I'm going to do, and this was, somebody in the comments mentioned this, and it does make sense. This number 1 pin is a shield for the outside of a metal 6SN7, and then some of them have a lower section that is metal that is supposed to also be a shield on the glass tube ones that's connected to this pin. And it's not going to hurt anything to run a little jumper wire from here over to this negative, and then we'll run another one from here to the negative on this tag strip just to go ahead and ground that shield. So the next thing I want to do is this resistor is going to go across these two terminals like this. And given this is going to be holding several things together at once, I think I'm going to go ahead and bend these leads up and get these bend them up like that. And then hook this resistor on here and then smash those down so they'll stay in place while we solder them. And then got one more of these I need to do that with. Trying to keep things fairly symmetrical. May not be exact, but we'll make it close. And then hook that one there. Let's smash that. Smash that. Then we don't have to worry about that resistor falling out of place while we're trying to solder it. So then we get some of this 18 gauge solid wire, and we're going to run this over it's going to get soldered into that hole and come over like this. So we can trim that off, strip that back, and that should work good there. I'm thinking I might go ahead and put this end into this strip first. So we want this one to come across. And again, you can, if you want to, you can just run it straight across. I like kind of giving these a little kind of right angle bends and stuff. I think it just looks better. I mean, this is more for just your personal, you know, it has nothing to do with how this is going to perform. It's more just, I think it just looks nice. What I may do too is put a little heat shrink tubing on this part right here, so these are held together. And again, that's totally just an aesthetic thing. It has nothing to do with the performance of the amplifier. And given it's going to have a bottom cover on it, nobody's going to see it but you. So it's totally up to you if you want to make it pretty or make it functional. So let me grab a piece of heat shrink tubing over here. And I'm just going to do them like this. And be careful not burning your finger like I almost did right there. And some people use a little heat gun. I just use the side of the soldering iron to shrink up tubing. Either one works fine. So that's going to sit like this. Hope I didn't cut that one too short. Almost kind of did. Nope. Let me strip this one back. And I crushed the ends of those two together like that, so they'll be easier to put through that hole. Then I tinned up the ends of these. We're going to heat this up, and actually I think I want to run them underneath these wires. So we're going to pull those out, solder these two wires in place like this, and then stick our transformer wires back through the top just like that. There we go. Then we can trim off this little bit of excess that's coming out of the other side here. Then this one goes right there. Just like that. So now we come in here and solder this resistor in this power wire to this terminal. You can always come back and bend these up just a little bit to kind of make them pretty. Let me get this soldered, and then I need to swap out my camera battery. Like that. And then maybe come in and put just a breath of solder on the back side too to make sure we got a really good connection here. And there we go. Give it a little tug. Now that's good and tight. Trim off the excess. And I could have run a jumper across these, but I really like just, we're this close, running each as an individual lead over to our B+, and then we know we're not going to have any interference between the two channels. So let me drop a new battery in the camera, and we'll come back and start running the wiring over to here and do our ground. Okay, well, we're back with some fresh batteries, and we're going to start working on wiring up the grounds for these input tubes. So I've put a couple of 5 tag terminal strips here, and we're going to have an extra one. And so instead of using this center one for the ground, we're going to float the ground on this pin here, which, given the sensitivity of the inputs, is probably a good idea. We need to run these two over here to our star ground point over here. So I bent up this piece of wire, and I put this together like that with some heat shrink tubing and split the wire into a Y. And it's going to go underneath these, then into these bottom holes on those 2 strips, or those 2 terminals. So we're going to go ahead and come in here and solder the ground. I'm going to do this so maybe you can see a little bit of this. Get the terminal nice and hot, and then fill it up with solder. And then do the same thing on this side. Probably going to be a bad idea to come back and flow a little solder in from this side on this joint too. Now the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and ground this shield pin to here, because it's grounded to the chassis, and we're going to run a wire over here to our star ground. So I'm going to go ahead and solder this in place so it doesn't end up falling out at some point. Just like that. And then I've got another one over here. And I bent these up like this. Just a little piece of wire with a little L leg bit in it. Helps it stay in place while we solder it. And this one is screwed down here, and I've checked this does have a good ground. So we're going to go ahead and solder this pin in onto this wire. And then go ahead and solder this one over here. And I think that's the only thing we're going to have connected to this terminal. It's this one little shield pin. And again, this isn't something that is in the signal path or anything. I'm not sure I even did this on my original one that I built, but somebody in the comments mentioned it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it, and it's pretty simple to do, so we're going to go ahead and knock that out. So now we have these pins grounded. This is going to get grounded to our star ground point here, like that. And we also need to ground this pin over to our star ground, and I've bent up this piece of wire. It needs to go under there. And over that one. And into there. Sometimes these things take a little bit of wiggle waggles to get them to go where you want them to go. Come in and solder this terminal. that. And then we want to come over on this end and solder these two grounds into our star ground. And these will be our last grounds that we're connecting. Just like that. We'll come and trim off the excess that's stuck through. So now we have this connected to our star ground point. We have these two connected to our star ground point. The last thing I want to do is I'm going to make up some wires to run from this terminal and this terminal that'll come around this way and up and go to this terminal and this terminal. So let me bend those up and we'll come back and solder those in place. Okay, we got a couple of red wires bent up here, and I decided to run those instead of across here. I decided to run them over, down, and up in between these two strips so that we have easy access to this side of each of these tag strips for soldering up the passives that go over to the tube, and also keeps them away from the heaters. So I've got my little alligator clip wire holder thingy here. We're going to come in here and solder this wire and this resistor to this terminal on this tag strip. Let me clean my tip off, get some fresh solder on it. I don't think it was making a good thermal connection there. There we go. Blow on that a little bit to cool that off. And then that's all good. Then bend this over. And I'm not going to solder this one yet because we do have some other stuff to solder onto this terminal. And so the last thing we're going to do is I bent up another little piece of wire here. Hold on one sec, let me bend the end of this up a little bit to help get a little better solder connection. And that's going to go there and there. And it'll sit right on top of this other one we just installed. I'm just gotta futz around with it a little bit to get it to sit in the right spot to solder. And once we get it soldered, we can kind of bend this back up into place. And sometimes you need to maybe stick something like that under there to kind of prop it up while you solder it. Let that cool off a breath. And then we'll bend this up into the kind of the place where we wanted it to be. Like that. Like that. And there we go. So now we have our two power wires coming over here from these filtering capacitors in these resistors. This will be our B plus that's going to the plate through the plate load resistor, which will go from here over to the plate. And anyway, we'll go over all that in the next video. I think this is a good stopping point here. Hope you're enjoying the series. If you are, please sub to the channel. Really helps me a lot. Got the schematic on the website. You can go check that out. And like the video. And we'll see you real soon for more 6SQ7 fun. Have a great day.